And I remember seeing there, and I guess this had played on my mind, posters on the walls, horrific posters saying, don't touch anything that looks like a shiny piece of metal. The perspective of change can be so different in an affected community, for example, than in the state that is providing some kind of response.
This is Silent Killers, a podcast from Face to Face and the international campaign to ban landmines. In 1997, the world said enough and signed the Mine Ban Treaty, but landmines are still claiming lives in many countries around the world. In this series, we meet survivors, frontline workers, and global changemakers, all fighting for a mine-free world. From Cambodia to the Ukraine, the danger is real. The work is urgent, and the path to peace is possible. Step by step, and yet still under our feet. This is Silent Killers. Well, welcome back to Silent Killers. My name is David Peck, and I'm with Face to Face, and this is a partnership between the International Campaign to Ban Landmines, that's the ICBL. Welcome to one of the world's most acronym-laden networks, the NGO world, and we're here with a very special guest here today to talk a little bit more about landmines and about disarmament and about some of the issues that the world's facing. And I just want to say that this partnership is going along very well. And so we've released the podcast Silent Killers. And if you're just coming to the show, please subscribe. Share this with family and friends. Social mediate the heck out of it for us if you don't mind. Go back and listen to the first episode. There's going to be 10 episodes altogether, and we're going to be sending it out worldwide, globally. We want people to step into this conversation. It's about amplifying voices of survivors and advocates and change makers doing the real work on the ground. And Loren is here with us today. Loren Persi is here. He's an impact research team leader with the ICBL. That's the International Campaign to Ban Landmines. And you can find out more about them at ICBL-CMC.org. Loren, thanks so much for joining me here on the show today.
Thank you, David. It's really a pleasure to be here.
So, there's so many questions when I have a new guest on a show, and I really am always thrilled to meet somebody, and you're sitting a long way away from where I'm sitting currently today. You're on the other side of the world, and isn't that a wonderful thing? And shouldn't we just be celebrating the fact that you and I have never met before, and here we are about to step into a very serious conversation that other people are going to step in with us, alongside of us. And I just love the fact that we're getting to build a bigger community. Loren, would you not agree?
Well, I totally agree. And I think that could be a big part of this conversation, because if we do in terms of research or reporting, it's about connectedness.
It really is. And I think the splash and ripple effect, it almost becomes, in a way, trite, sometimes when you talk about it, but it truly is the idea of real change being incremental, that one conversation leads to a greater conversation and it builds the community. And thanks for being here with us. You've been a part of this community for a couple of decades, at least, from my understanding. You've been with the ICBL a long time. I wonder if you could just maybe help me out here and our listeners. Tell us a little bit about how you find yourself sitting here today as an activist, as a researcher, as an academic.
Well, David, I guess I was at university in the early 2000s, and it was just after 9/11. And I was studying specifically because I had an interest in refugee issues, particularly in Southeast Asia and around the situation in Myanmar, Burma. And at that time, the area where I had hoped to work had seen a really terrible conflict on the border area between Thailand and Burma. And the organization that I was in touch with said that just wouldn't be possible anymore. And someone said to me, "What are you going to do now?" And I just heard about the situation in Afghanistan, I guess, where there had been cluster bombs, which way back in 2001, there wasn't really a discussion on a ban yet, and had heard something about landmines, particularly from travel that I'd done before. I once got caught up in an exercise to help as a person who was being mock evacuated from a village by UFOR, the military forces of Czech, who were helping stabilize some parts of Bosnia. And I remember seeing there, and I guess this had played on my mind, posters on the walls, horrific posters saying, don't touch anything that looks like a shiny piece of metal. And I thought, who would do that? Why would those posters be there? And I think that stayed with me. And having gone back to university and wondered what I was doing, my answer was almost immediately to this person, I think I'm going to work on issues of landmines and unexploded bombs. But David, when I said that, I didn't really know where it came from. Maybe I was just making it up because I needed something to say, right?
Loren, that's fascinating to me. So it's almost as if this little detached piece of advocacy and activism somebody was doing, put a poster on a wall, grabbed your attention, planted a seed, and here we are today, 24 years later. I mean, come on. How remarkable is that? Isn't that what this conversation that you and I are having about, isn't that what Silent Killers and all the work that ICBL does and Landmine Monitor, isn't that what it's really about? Raising awareness, planting seeds.
It is, David. It's about the messages, but it's also about the people, I think, who carry it forward. So like at that time, I was lucky because, as I mentioned, I was interested in refugee issues to be working with someone who I could go up to and say, have you heard of this landmine issue? And this is how in the dark I was. I didn't know there was just been a treaty, in the recent years. I didn't know that there was particularly a campaign. I'd just seen the sort of things that many people had seen about Princess Diana at the time. And luckily that person helped me get a volunteer job in Australia with a very strong network in Australia. And it was really people in that network who were promoting the work in Southeast Asia. And that's where different people's commitment led to new opportunities. And I think I would take this opportunity to mention one person who's very dear to me in that, and her name is Sister Patricia Peck. She was an activist, a real activist on many issues, but including mines, a small, feisty nun who sent me on an internship to Thailand for a huge meeting. And I remember years later, probably one of the last times that I've been in touch with her, she said, her end of her conversation is just, keep stirring, Loren, keep stirring. I think that's kind of the attitude of the people who've been pushing to get this treaty happening. And you've spoken with Jody and others.
Yeah, it's amazing. I love that you use the word feisty. Hey, are we calling out your Australian roots here a little bit? The phrase keep stirring, because I think that's a campaign. I think we should have that on a t-shirt somewhere.
Yeah, I don't know if that's an Australian saying. Certainly, Sister Pat had a lot of Australian sayings, I think. So it may well be. Yeah, look, it resonated with me because I also knew that was her spirit.
Loren, what I hear is take risks, ask questions, dig a little deeper. Don't be afraid to provoke. That's all, some of the things I'm hearing with Keep Stirring. I think it's wonderful.
Yeah, and for her, I think it was also about just ask for what you want, the change you want to see in the world. And that was really, I got her thing. She just would never stop asking for that change. Landmines, the Rohingya issue, she was into it many, many years before it got to that devastating stage where everyone heard about it. And I think that's true of many of our colleagues. I mean, I might even just jump in here and say about the Landmine Monitor report.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about that. What actually is it? Can you kind of give us a simple framework for it?
Yeah, I'd like to give it some context kind of from that spirit, because the Landmine Monitor report is a collection of the information from monitoring. And it's kind of useful to make a distinction between monitoring and reporting in that sense, because reporting is what is kind of offered to the world, to the public, to the media, to the diplomats who makes decisions. But the monitoring is more of an ongoing process. And that's in part some mundane things like collecting documents, processing them. But it's also people going out and asking questions. And what I think is unique about the Mine Ban Treaty and its interaction with the Landmine Monitor, which kind of has done since its the very beginning a job of being a de facto holistic reporting mechanism, for this treaty. What's kind of unique about it is it has been very open, more than any, other thing I can think of in the world that I've seen, to having people ask questions of governments, ask questions of operators, because it came from that spirit, that keep stirring spirit, I think, which was also referred to in the term of, like, and this is a bit more dry, like cooperative compliance. So I don't know if others have mentioned it, probably it's come up, but cooperative compliance, especially in the area of monitoring, is about states having made commitments or even to relay what those promises and commitments could be to states which haven't made them, and then getting their feedback on it. And you would think that, in some cases that would be impossible. In some cases it's been very difficult, but for the most part, it's really been successful. And what's amazing is that in many times when even the questions are hard or the situation is difficult, the states or others are really more than willing to come back with answers, and sometimes actually chase us to give them to us, right? So it has kind of formed as a community of sharing information, and a community where it's okay to ask. It's expected to ask, and asking makes change.
Loren, it seems to me that this is really about, and I love that you made the distinction between monitoring and reporting, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about that with respect to the places where this research lands. So the desks that it gets to, the boardrooms, the conferences, the podiums, et cetera, the newspapers, and so on and so forth. And maybe the difference that maybe it even makes. But is it about holding people accountable in a sense? This gives you the data that I can say, hang on a minute here, things aren't quite the way they seem. Is that what the report is largely about?
That's an element of it. But moreover, it's about showing what the big picture is from many perspectives, because we're not putting our own perspective in this. I mean, there's, of course, other excellent reporting which comes from the perspectives of states, different organizations, and international bodies. But we're collecting information from as many sources as we can, and then relaying it back and we ask the questions, we have questionnaires. And from all that and the follow-up, we relay back, and that's kind of a mirror of the situation. So accountability is an element, but also this is what's happening is an element, and this is what was said still needs to be done is an element. And all those elements are essential, especially considering there can be such a vastly different perception of any situation. And here I'm especially thinking of what we call impact reporting. So in the modern, I'd say impact reporting really means concentrating on those things which have a deep human impact. That's the contamination by weapons and their use causing the contamination that has casualties, the casualties and the clearance of the contamination, informing people about how to avoid the risks or be aware of the risks of the contamination, and then also the ways of ensuring that people who have been injured or the families of those killed receive assistance. And also that those killed and injured are recorded, right? And recognition is also an important part of the whole thing.
Loren, why do you think this kind of independent civil society-led reporting matters so much?
Well, one thing is no one else does it. So
that's a pretty good answer. That's a pretty good answer.
In that sense, and it's much used. So, I mean, if we weren't doing it, it wouldn't be there. And clearly there is actually like a great appetite for it and a need for it. It's used a lot. But going back, you asked about how it is useful to the different people who might receive it. So, and I think in that sense, when you mentioned, for example, media, the use of this kind of information to media is very, very different than to the use to an organization that provides assistance that might be looking for where gaps are or to prove that that they're addressing those particular areas. They might be different to a state which is looking to either do something similar or to look good. Because looking good is part of the motivation for monitoring and reporting as much as filling gaps is. But it's also different for the victims and affected communities. And one of the things that I think I like anyone to keep in mind when they're thinking about the audience of this kind of reporting from the monitoring is the perspective of change can be so different in the affected community, for example, than in the state that is providing some kind of response. And the lag in the effect that they will have in someone's life can be huge, or it might not reach enough people that even where the state thinks that it's done a really great job, that's recognized in when you go out to a community. And there's a couple of reasons for that. And this is one of the things that is, intrinsic to having a broad monitoring is somehow to join these stories together because, David, they are stories. It's a flow of story. It's the story of the state and what it's done, of service providers and what they do, and people in communities and the victims and what they experience. And I often think about when you go out and do a survey, and often we have many researchers, and many of them are mine survivors themselves. And sometimes they go out and they ask in their networks and communities, what happened? How did things change? And, even if there's a questionnaire for that, there's some specific questions that people can answer, actually, most likely that is going to be a conversation which is going to go all night with a bunch of people coming in and out, on their motorbikes or whatever their means of transport is there, telling the stories of their life on a day-to-day level, what's happening for them, if they can get things or not, how it's affecting their relationship to be, a survivor or to be a victim who doesn't have access to work. And this is almost impossible to show fully this aspect of the monitoring is almost impossible to show fully in the reporting, but it does kind of balance it out to have the access to communities.
Well, I think for me, it's yes, it's about data, it's about numbers and statistics and so on. But really, I think the monitor, and help me out here, is a very good reminder to us all that real people are connected to these issues. This isn't just, it is just a story. But, stories can change the world. Stories can move political and social mountains, it seems to me. And so, Richard Wagamese, famous Indigenous Canadian writer, I quote him all the time, stories are meant to heal. And isn't that a beautiful thing? So I love that about the work you do. This scale is immense to me when I think of how big the world is and how many issues there are. And maybe we're going to talk a little bit about some of the more relevant or more immediate issues, I guess you could say, that are currently facing this work and landmines around the world and so on because of the Ukraine war and other things. But how do you go about doing this, Loren? I mean, you've got a team. What does it look like on the ground for you from a data collection perspective? Can you help us out there a bit?
I think in this sense, what we do and our whole team works in cycles. So the cycle usually begins with analyzing what's available. States provide a lot of reporting themselves during the year in different ways. They have reports, they make statements, they report things to the media themselves, they have their own websites and outlets, and then there's many, many other sources, innumerable sources. It does seem overwhelming sometimes, and you're always wondering if you miss something too. So,
right, I would think so. Yeah, where are the gaps? How would you even know what they are?
And then sometimes you hope that you miss something because exactly with where are the gaps, there's a gap, and you're thinking, there must be some reporting. Someone must be able to answer this. We can ask this question, and sometimes that gap remains, sometimes for years. But the reporting cycle allows the core team of researchers, the information providers who are expecting our questions and questionnaires, or who are anticipating that they will put in their reports, sometimes adjusted over time to what this dialogue or this series of questions is. So one of the things with the research cycle is by asking questions, you often see the answers then popping up in other places. And that becomes almost like sustainable in a way. You can start asking new questions. A classic example of that is just in terms of the data on casualties. Because 20 years ago, it was unusual to have really disaggregated, to know whether casualties were women, men, boys, girls. It was just sort of a more of a box checking exercise. People's lives, right? But the focus was elsewhere. And now, of years of us and others asking that and fine tuning of systems, you see that this has become a commonly expected way of reporting, and even more detailed than that. So, yeah, in the cycle, it changes as people get used to the questions, and then just triangulating masses of information to get the most succinct updates that we can.
How often is the monitor published?
We have 2 monitor reports now. So both are published annually. The Cluster Munition Monitor was just published now in September, and the Landmine Monitor will be ready in a few months towards the end of the year. They have slightly different content because of the weapons and their nature being different. Also because they're around the cycle of meetings regarding their prohibition.
Yeah, sure. Loren, and a real quick shout out here to ICBL and the work that you do. How do I get a copy of it? How does an NGO get a copy of it? How does a politician access this info?
David, most of it is online. It's absolutely available at the website, the-monitor.org. And you can find that there, as well as other country-specific information and a whole bunch of products that we put out on specific issues as well. Things like the effects of landmines on children, gender, updates on the funding that goes to deal with the problem, and also other aspects of things like concerning aspects such as the use of weapons.
No, that's great. It's super accessible. Loren, what are you seeing now with casualties? You mentioned casualties and disaggregated data and so on. I would imagine you're seeing trends. I don't even like using that word, but patterns, I suppose, in casualties, countries and casualties, I would imagine. Can you talk about that a bit?
Definitely patterns, David. And we see a change in, I guess, the last decade or so, particularly because, countries that joined the prohibition, the anti-personnel mine ban treaty, for the most part, because of clearing the mines, the number of casualties have gone down. And the exception to that is basically when there's new conflict. And in most recent years, the mines used in such conflicts tend to be kind of handmade. They're improvised explosive devices that act as anti-personnel mines. And this has been the case, for example, in Yemen in recent years. It was for a long time in Colombia, a states party, particularly until the peace agreement with the FARC, and in Afghanistan until the political change in 2021. In the whole area of around the Lake Chad Basin, many countries in Africa are also affected by these kind of mines, and so was Syria until the use of them having basically stopped, but the impact going on as people move and return to their homes. And so the trend is really that the use of improvised anti-personnel mines by non-state armed groups and the use of mines and the contamination by explosive weapons of war in conflict. But as you mentioned, this has kind of had a dramatic change with the situation in Ukraine, where manufactured anti-personnel mines have been massively used by Russian forces since the full invasion of 2022. And also we see in Myanmar, both government manufactured mines and improvised mines by non-state armed groups used. And these situations are causing hundreds of casualties.
Loren, I want to ask a little bit more specifically about some of the casualties. I've done, like you, a fair bit of work in Southeast Asia, Cambodia in particular, and actually made a film called Broken Courage, which we're talking about at the ICBL and with others and trying to get the film out there. And it's, by the way, it's brokencouragethemovie.com. And the film highlights a man who's a landmine survivor, former Khmer Rouge soldier. And one of the things I've noticed in working in that part of the world, one of the most heavily landmine countries in the world, a lot of rural farmers are the casualties. So we're talking about, on some level, we're all innocent, it seems to me. That's a philosophical conversation for another time, I think. But anyone who stands on an indiscriminate weapon 50 years after a war, I don't know. That's a crazy world we're living in. What's the monitor telling you? Is it men? Is it farmers? I mean, are there any stats on that? Is it children largely, really interested in that?
It's a good question. And I think this is where, particularly when we talk about the states that have joined the treaty, like Cambodia, and have done a lot of clearance, but where there's still casualties, or we talk about these casualties over the years in these countries, then it's absolutely clear that most of the people killed and injured men and boys. Men, particularly who work in the field or other rural jobs, or have to travel for their work, or are nomadic people who move through areas that weren't cleared. And, children often on the way to school or playing in fields, and also many children work in many countries, as you'd be aware, David, taking care of livestock. So these similar roles that would take them into these dangerous areas. And that's very much the case. And these are really the risk groups. And people need to do that to survive, or they need to work. They need to go to school.
Do you see anything with respect to assisting people who have suffered from these types of accidents in your research and with the monitor and so on, and the work that you've done over the years? Obviously, some of the guests we've had on the show have talked about that, about, doing the advocacy, but also the sleeves rolled up, actually helping landmine survivors. What can you tell us about that? And I mean, it's such a part of this issue. It's such a human part of this issue, it seems to me.
Yeah, it's a human part of the issue. It's also a legal part of the issue. I mean, I think one of the great things is that when we're reporting on the assistance to victims, for most countries, this is actually not just a promise, but a right that they need to deliver to victims. And yet, in many cases, it takes a long time to build up a health and rehabilitation system so that it would reach exactly the people you were talking about, David, people in farmlands, remote areas, poor people who can't travel, children who need a limb replaced every year. Many of the systems aren't up to it. Many of those services are provided by the International Committee of the Red Cross, especially a few large NGOs like Humanity and Inclusion. And yet there's massive gaps remaining. But something that I think people should be really aware of is that survivors or victims are not just passive recipients in this. They're really active. And there are some extremely strong survivor networks in many of the countries who have taken on multiple kind of roles, sometimes demanding rights, but sometimes providing services, sometimes just letting people know where services are available, or whether they can get the thing there. Because the thing that you really don't want to have to do is travel from a remote area to a rehabilitation center and find out you're not going to be served. You lose your working time. You lose the chance of earning for nothing. So the survivors networks themselves, although they're very minimally funded or raising the money in ways that they can to keep themselves going, really play a vital role in that whole system.
Yeah. So much great work being done, and yet so much work still to be done, really, isn't there, from an advocacy perspective and public engagement and fundraising, and actually, the removal of these. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. I don't even know what to call them anymore. I mean, silent killers is great. but, weapons doesn't seem like even a proper way to describe them. You need the word indiscriminate in there. I think maybe the word evil, maybe we could toss in there as well, Loren. But again, it's really emotive language, but still, it's so infuriating on one hand, and you must feel that. And I'd love to know, you've been at this a long time. You've been dropping those pebbles in the pond for a long time. And I would imagine you, like me, still trust the ripple. I mean, I really do. I trust that ripple. What kind of impact do you think the monitors had on the movement towards banning landmines globally? And do you think it's moved the needle?
Oh, look,
I know that's a biggie.
Yeah, it's a biggie, and I want to say, and I think it's true, and even from before my time, yeah, it really has moved the needle. Like it's really done a lot. I think it's easy, and I find myself sometimes it's easy to get like a little bit disparaged, right? Because often
Loren,
year after year, we report, we report like where it didn't change. And like those gaps.
How is this getting any better?
Yeah. Or like you say, even in the case that that some people are still going to be victims, right? And maybe a couple of decades ago, I hoped it would be done by now. There were promises by states that they would finish clearing by now. And they haven't. And there are still victims. And, one of the things that I think about in this context, and because, you mentioned Cambodia and the situation there, and we talk about civilian victims, or we often use percentages that are impactful. They make people realize, and unfortunately we have to say them over and over again, often, to say the percentage of victims is generally around 90% civilian compared to military. And this is pretty consistent.
It's a mind-boggling number, really, isn't it?
It's horrific, and it's consistent. So it's unfortunate to have to be able to prove it, but it proves itself. But then if you think in the context of Cambodia, David, if they have a military victim now in Cambodia, it's normally someone going on a picnic. The civil war in Cambodia ended a long, long time ago. So, in fact, so long after the conflict, there really isn't a distinction between military and civilian. There is in conflict. But now, this legacy goes on so long that it goes beyond any relevance of conflict. It just stays there.
That's quite an image. The idea of an ex-military or even somebody who is in the military going out for a picnic with their family in rural Cambodia in the province of Stung Treng and standing on a landmine that had been planted 45 years before.
And it happens. And we see it.
And of course it happened.
Yeah, we see it in the data because young people are still in the army and they like to go out. And this is not factored into this like civilian military equation. This is about people's lives being continuously affected.
And your comment earlier too about it being a promise and a right. I mean, don't we all have a right to go out and enjoy a picnic with our family? And unfortunately, we don't all live in a situation where that is feasible, where that is just easy to do, where there are issues. And unfortunately, some of them are buried below the ground. And that's why, I just have so much respect for the work that ICBL is doing and for what you're doing with the monitor. And I mean, on some levels, it must be pretty painstaking work, I would think, just dealing with numbers and so on. And what's the word? Stultifying on a certain level. But if you can always keep in mind that this is still about that human story. There are real people, families, children attached to these things. Loren, we've got to wrap in a few minutes. And I hate that, by the way. I love these conversations because I feel when we get to the end of them, we're just getting rolling here. And there's so much more to be said. And I really do want to encourage people to head to the website. We'll call that out again later before we wrap. But what's the call to action here from your perspective? You've got a few minutes to chat with somebody. You're on TV. I don't know your last words. What are they going to be? With respect to the monitor, the work of ICBL and disarmament, what is it, Loren? Also a pretty big question.
It is a big question, but I think the call to action is keep paying attention to the people who are affected, because that's really not only is it all about, but what really makes the difference. When we began this conversation, we're talking about connection. And somehow, through reporting, which can be dry and not just ours, with monitoring and going out and asking these questions, I'd say let's all keep the connection, because if we have the connection, then I think we have the motivation to keep pushing, or as we said, to keep stirring, to keep asking for what needs to be, what needs to change.
Yeah, Loren, I think we both should send a note to some folks at the higher levels at ICBL and say, I think we might be onto something here, the Keep Stirring campaign. I can see the baseball hats and the T-shirts, the buttons and the bumper stickers, I mean, the coffee mugs. It's
always
going to be big, Loren.
Needed. It's always going to be needed. A new slogan, because
a new slogan. Well, and just to wrap, and again, I want to thank you for your time. And folks, if you're looking to get a hold of the monitor, it is the-monitor.org, and it's ICBL-CMC.org as well to find out more about all the work that they're doing, the international campaign to ban landmines. You can find a link to Silent Killers there. But if you listen to on Spotify or Apple or somewhere else, please subscribe and leave us a review, share it with family and friends. Loren, I want to say thanks for all the work you do and for hanging out with me here today on the show. But maybe we can kind of wrap, and I'd love to, I don't know, maybe you can put a period on this, but Sister Pat, what was the line? Ask for the change you want to see in the world. I mean, how beautiful is that?
Yeah. This is what makes it happen. It's people like that.
This is what makes it happen. Loren, thanks for joining me here on Silent Killers. Subscribe wherever you listen, and stay tuned. More to come. My name's David Peck, and this is Silent Killers.
Thanks, David.